Many Like Jesus presents a study series preparing the saints to face and defeat the schemes of the New World Order. God's plan in the Scriptures is to have many sons like the one who pleases His heart. Test everything. Hold fast to what is good.
In the previous video, we were talking about the problem when generalizing interpretation. And we are in part 4, that is called Generalizing Interpretation and the Elect. Now, to understand the problem when generalizing interpretation, and to understand that we cannot apply all the scriptures to all believers indiscriminately, we need to understand several Bible concepts that we were analyzing. And in the first video, we spoke about one of those concepts is that Yahweh calls the things that are not as if they were. And we talked about that in the previous video. Also, we talk a related concept that is that the Holy Ones not fulfilling promised conditions, or the saints or the brethren or believers walking away from promised conditions and expecting to receive the fulfillment of a condition. That doesn't work like that in the Bible. Lastly and simply, priests will minister Yahweh as a norm of every single day, building altars wherever they go. Are we a priest? True priests will minister Yahweh, not people. In Ezekiel 44, to minister the people and not the living Yahweh was a punishment, not a blessing. In verse 13 reads in the context of the born Levites, which walk away from Yahweh to follow what the people wanted. I'm reading in Ezekiel chapter 44 and verse 13. And they shall not come near me to minister to me as priest, nor come near any of my holy things, nor unto the most holy place. But they shall bear their shame and their abominations which they have committed. Their punishment was to minister the people, as stated in verse 11, saying, Yet they shall be ministers in my sanctuary, as gatekeepers of the house and ministers of the house. They shall slay the burnt offering and the sacrifice for the people, and they shall stand before them, before the people, to minister to them. That's New King James Version. An entire book can be written on this regard, but I must leave it here. But that was explained in the previous video. Today, we are talking about what the Bible calls the higher calling, that not all believers will be like Jesus. The higher calling in the Bible is to become like Jesus. And because of the fact that not all believers are called to be like Jesus, that's another reason why certain verses that we will explain in the next video cannot be applied to all believers indiscriminately. So let's talk about not all believers will become like Jesus. Remember, this is a superficial introduction to a topic. Let's read 1 Corinthians 15, 40-42 to help in my point on these regards that not all believers will be resurrected as Jesus himself. We are going to read in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verses 40-42 in New American Standard Bible. There are also heavenly bodies and earthly bodies, but the glory of the heavenly is one, and the glory of the earthly is another. Verse 41, there is one glory of the sun, and another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars, for a star differs from a star in glory. Listen to what it follows, verse 42. So also is the resurrection of the dead. Listen to that. The resurrection among believers that participate in the resurrection will resurrect with different levels of glory. We are not going to be all clones or all the same. One is the glory of the sun, and another the glory of the moon, and another the glory of the stars. And there are different levels of glory from star to star, different levels of glory. And the verse 42 reads, listen carefully, so also is the resurrection of the dead. Not all believers will have the exact same glory. Not all believers will become to the higher glory, which is the glory of Jesus himself. But there are different levels, and we must understand that. We already talked about the fact of not overcoming in the chapters 2 and 3 in the book of Revelation. And that fact disqualifies a vast majority to enjoy the promises of glory given by Jesus himself to the 7 churches. Of course, without losing their salvation. But there is still time to grasp verses like Colossians 1:27. I am trying to encourage you, whomever you are there listening to me, there is still time to become like Jesus and to get the best of him. Colossians 1:27 says, Christ in you, the hope of glory. The hope of glory is within you. If you have Christ in your heart, you have an invitation to receive the glory of Jesus, to become like him in all his plenitude. But the reality is that not all believers will become like Jesus. And that's why I am taking the time to explain this and trying to make people understand about this. Not all believers will become kings of the nations, as we can see in Revelation chapter 2, verses 26 and 27. I am reading also in New American Standard Bible. He who overcomes and he who keeps my deeds until the end, to him, listen to that, not to all believers in this church of Thyatira. I don't know exactly how to pronounce that in English, but it says, he who overcomes, to him I will give authority over the nations, and he, not all believers, shall rule them with a rod of iron, as the vessels of the potter are broken to pieces, as I also have received authority from my Father, and I will give him the morning star. Not to all believers in that church. To him who overcomes, he will give the morning star. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So, as we can see in this verse, not all believers will become kings. Even when the declaration that he had called us from the nations to be kings and priests, that will not be fulfilled if we walk away from the path or the original trajectory of the word given by Jesus himself. So we not all will become kings of the nations, as we are reading in this verse. There is a lot more to explain in this verse that I will do in the next project. But for now, this is just to emphasize the fact that not all will become kings. If we all become kings, just think about this for a second. If we as all believers become kings, and all the wicked and the sinners are cast into the lake of fire, who are we going to reign over? There will be no one to reign over. We already reviewed this partially in part 1 of this presentation, video number 7. You can review more details about that. Also, Jesus himself say that some will be governors over 10 cities, over 5 cities, and 2 cities. That very mention is telling us that other than the New Jerusalem, there will be many cities outside the holy city. The disciples, they were promised to reign in 12 thrones among the sons of Israel, which I believe leaves 143,988 office vacancies available at different levels to complete the 144,000 just for Israel as a physical nation. Can you start thinking how many more are needed for the rest of the nations all over the world? Many people that will qualify for the level of the 144,000 of the sons of Israel that are required and needed for the rest of the nations. Those 144,000 are just to govern over Israel as a physical nation. But there will be many other nations that need a lot more than 144,000 to reign and govern in different levels. Some over 10 cities, others over 5 cities or 2 cities, or the king of the nations. You name it, different levels. And we need to understand that. We see in the Bible that the cosmology of the spiritual realm above the nations has principalities over them, such as the prince of Persia and the prince of Greece that are mentioned in the book of the prophet Daniel. Well, according to my studies and understanding to this point, those principalities, the prince of Persia and the prince of Greece, are fallen entities, and I will explain about that also in the next project that is described in Deuteronomy chapter 32. But that's another falling of sons of God, the B'nai Elim that fall, not only the first angels that are mentioned in Genesis 6, but the angels also and the princes, sons of God, B'nai Elim, as is described in Deuteronomy chapter 32. They fall and they were assigned to the nations in the Tower of Babel to be the gods of the nations. But according to my studies and understanding, those principalities will be kicked out and new princes will replace them. Princes that were chosen among the overcomers of the 7 churches and that now, with the likeness of Yeshua, dressed in incorruption and immortality, will serve our Elohim and God, cleaning the heavenlies and reigning from heaven over the matters of the earth, just as today, but under new management. The Bible in Revelation 21 reveals, within the context of the New Jerusalem on earth, that many nations are outside, to the point where the kings of those nations will bring their riches and glory to the New Jerusalem, meaning they are not living inside, they live outside in order to bring into the New Jerusalem. But it seems like they have the capability or the allowance of entering the New Jerusalem in the case of these kings. But above earthly governing, I also see believers whom, as Enoch and after the first resurrection, will be chosen to become B'nai Elohim, the new B'nai Elohim, which is a Hebrew expression. Sons of God to another level, to a level of Jesus. Of course, something like the younger brothers of Jesus, let's put it that way. And replace the original state that was abandoned by the B'nai Elohim that the Bible say and we know as fallen angels. Is my conjecture that these new B'nai Elim or B'nai Elohim whom are believers that become like Jesus to the higher level and full of glory, will be chosen among the overcomers of the seven churches described in Revelations chapter 2 and 3. According to the book of Jubilees, Enoch became metaphysical, meaning that he has the capability of coming to the earthly realm to manifest in this realm and return to the heavenlies. There is no surprise about that. It's just like Jesus. After he went to heaven and got glorified again, just like Jesus after resurrection and glorification, he came back in occasions and interact with humans to return to the heavenlies. That's not new in the Bible. And Enoch experienced the same according to the book of Jubilees, and I believe that the chosen ones that become like Jesus, once glorified and dressed in incorruption and immortality and in glory, they will have that metaphysical capability. Those elected believers, now like Jesus, in all plenitude and glory, will be administrators in the heavenly realm, within the kingdom of heaven, and will function as watchers, the new watchers, over earthly matters, replacing those who abandoned their original estate according to the Bible. The new watchers. Can you imagine? That's awesome. So when I'm talking about being like Jesus or the resemblance of the Son, I am talking many levels, as in the earthly realm and also in the heavenlies. Blessed be the name of Yeshua Messiah, whose sacrifice and shedding of blood reaches deeper and unknown levels above anything that could ever cross human minds and imagination. That's why, as we will study in later chapters in this presentation, we need to get dressed with incorruption and immortality in order to enter to the higher levels of glory available through Yeshua to mankind. Because, remember, is Christ in you, the hope of glory, the hope of that glory of Jesus, of Yeshua HaMashiach is in you today. Now, considering all the previous explained biblical arguments, it's my conjecture that are certain verses in the Bible, such as, and we will review these verses closely in the next video, but I will just mention it briefly. It's like Romans 8:28. Romans 8:28 cannot be applied to all believers indiscriminately, only for those who are chosen to be like Jesus. Chosen since the foundation of the earth, only apply to the overcomers of the seven churches, my brethren. That cannot be applied to all believers, because not all believers will be overcomers. Are them being left behind? No way. They are being invited today. Every single believer, everyone who has Christ in his heart is being invited to this. It's not Yeshua's fault. It's our fault. We walk away from the invitation. Remember the parable? We have been all invited to the supper of the wedding of the Lamb, but many will not come to the wedding, even when we are all invited in Yeshua HaMashiach. So we'll review those verses later in the next video, but for now, every single believer, as soon as it is born again, placing their faith in Yeshua for forgiveness of sins, are automatically invited to become like Jesus and participate in the wedding supper of the Lamb. They are all invited, but not all will actually attend to the wedding. So from that biblical perspective, there are scriptures that only apply or are applicable to the elect and not to all the body of believers as a whole. But at the same time, those scriptures are directed to all believers because the door of opportunity is now wide open by grace and mercy. And as we already reviewed, he calls things that are not as if they were as a final product. But in the sense of reality and application, there are scriptures that apply only to the elect. We will see some sample verses related to predestination at the end of this chapter in the next video. But if we study the Bible carefully, and we already considered a brief related explanation in the previous two concepts, we find that even when some passages sounds like applicable to all believers, there are implied principles and requirements that need to be fulfilled by the recipients in order to actually receive the benefit of scriptural promises. Bible topics like this apply to the previously mentioned concept that emphasizes that the totality of the scriptures as a whole is major than any single verse in itself. My prayer is to be a vessel that could be used to encourage you to make sure to refocus your purpose in life towards the Holy of Holies, where Yahweh and Yeshua are in glory, attaching to their hearts verses like Colossians 1:27 they already mentioned, is Christ in you. It's already there, the hope of glory, but you need to stay within the pattern, within the parameters of the given trajectory of the word that came out of the mouth of the Most High. Let us press with the same mind or attitude of the Apostle Paul. I'm reading in Philippians chapter 3 from verse 10. That I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed to his death, if by any means, listen to this, what Paul was saying, if by any means I may attain to the resurrection from the dead. Studying this passage, I will explain later, and I already have explained a little bit. It's talking about the first resurrection, not the second one. Verse 12 reads, Philippians 3:12, not that I have already attained it, or that I am already perfected, but I press on, that I may lay hold of that for which Christ Jesus has also laid hold of me. Brethren, I do not count myself to have apprehended, but one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forward to those things which are ahead, I press toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. What is the upward call of God? To be like Jesus. Even if at the end and before the eyes of the Most High, I am not chosen as elect as I am speaking to you, but at least to be considered a candidate is already an honor. After that needed parenthesis, let us go back to the biblical concept that not all believers will become like Jesus. And let me talk to an expression that appears in 1 John chapter 3. Let's read it. 1 John chapter 3, I'm reading verses 2 and 3. Beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not appeared as yet what we will be. We know that when he appears, we will be like him. Listen to that. We will be like him, because we will see him as he is. Where? In us. And everyone who has this hope, there goes our key word again, like Colossians 1:27, the hope of glory. is mentioned here, and everyone has this hope fixed in him purifies himself just as he is pure. That's New American Standard Bible. Where are we going to see him just as he is? Within ourselves, brothers. We should be practicing our entire Christian life in the school of obedience to his voice. And figuratively speaking, our graduation day will be to meet him at his coming. As the verse 3 shows, and everyone who has this hope fixed in him purifies himself just as he is pure. Nobody has to be pushing someone who has that hope in the heart. Nobody has to be asking him to pray and to define priorities and to have a willing heart to hear the voice of the Father and live in holiness. Nobody has to do that. Why? Because he has the hope within him. And he really wants to be like Jesus and conquer even sin in his life. If we want to be like him and we have the hope to get there, no one has to be pushing us to do whatever is necessary for that indescribable reward. So, do all of us qualify for the application of this verse? Do we all be like him? Sadly, I don't think so. This is clearly stated in the context of 1 John chapter 2 and verse 28, just the previous two verses before. The context is saying, now, little children, I'm reading in 1 John chapter 2, verse 28 in New American Standard Bible. That's the context. The context of being like him and to have this hope fixed in our hearts and that we will be like him. It says, 1 John 2:28, now, little children, abide in him, so that when he appears, we may have confidence and not shrink away from him in shame at his coming. Listen to that. That's so sad. I read it again. Now, little children, abide in him, in Jesus, so that when he appears, we may have confidence and not shrink away from him in shame at his coming. This clearly shows that there will be Christians whom, for whatever reason, when he comes, will shrink away from him in shame at his coming. I will continue with the same topic in the next program.
All of these videos in the series are available in the English section of muchoscomojesus.com, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Many Like Jesus. Feel free to use these videos to study yourself, a home study group, or a class in your congregation. And remember, to have many sons like Jesus is God's end-time plan in the Bible to resolve the chaos of this world. Many Like Jesus is a ministry of muchoscomojesus.com.